All right, so digital asset investment is all the craze right now. We've seen the markets at full on tilt with a lot of news around ETFs and other things that are hitting the market. So we really wanted to dive in deeper to someone who's been doing digital asset investment for a while. And that, of course, is Mr. Russell Starr, who's the executive chairman and CEO for DeFi Technologies. Great to have you on the show, Russell.
Yeah, really nice to meet you as well, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Russell, let's get into DeFi Tech. A little bit about the company, how you guys started building an investment solution for crypto and just in general blockchain solutions that are happening out there on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so our journey has been a really interesting one. We have an exceptional management team. Johan Wattenstrom, who's our COO, is the creator of XBT, which is now known as CoinShares,
Yep.
pretty much the largest ETF company in the world. And Olivier Roussy-Newton, who created and built Hive Blockchain, which is the largest Ethereum miner in the world. He's one of our co-founders. And effectively, the premise was Olivier looking at the revenues on the Ethereum chain growing, recognizing that it was being driven largely by DeFi protocols, which at that time would have been just a few billion in total value locked TVL. Now, obviously, we're well above that into the hundreds of billions. And Olivier, just the way that he had created Hive, said to himself, look, if I can actually create a listed, regulated Ethereum mining company, why can't I do something similar for DeFi, which is, in his view and our view, obviously the future of the crypto markets, not just
Right.
Bitcoin and Ethereum. We created a company along with Johan where we wrap DeFi protocols, very simply wrap, and list them as ETFs or ETPs, and in Europe, ETNs. And so today we have what's called Bitcoin Zero, Ethereum Zero. We have a Solana, Cardano, and Polkadot ETP. And
Hmm.
thus far, we've only been listed in what's called the Nordic growth market. And some people will be like, well, why did you do that? The reality is that the NGM, Nordic growth market, is owned by the German markets, Frankfurt and Stuttgart. And once you actually prove your concept up, you settle properly, you grow your assets, it's actually a very seamless integration to move it into the German markets, which we've just recently done. We actually just press released today that we launched on Frankfurt. And so I suspect that our 250 million in AUM is going to grow substantially now that Bitcoin's hitting the headlines again,
Right.
ETFs are hitting the headlines, and we're now actually in arguably one of the largest global markets possible on the Frankfurt exchange.
Russell, when you look at ETFs, ETPs, and kind of the expansion we've seen on a global asset class level, which is really what's happening literally right before our very eyes right now, especially with the
Yep.
US now just locking in the first Bitcoin ETF just out
Yep.
up onto the market today. The opportunity here is big in terms of the number of investors. You've got everything from family offices to traditional investment capital now moving into the space. Obviously, large individual wealth traders
Yep.
and people really that are moving into the market that have had money on the sidelines for quite some time and have been looking at this market and maybe are finally saying, hey, it's finally grown up. Now is the time. What is your thought on whether or not that's going to actually happen in terms of getting this sideline capital into the industry?
Yeah. So look, the reason why we've done what we've done is our view is, and I believe it is the view of most of the world, there's almost a reluctance to open an account on Coinbase or Kraken or Frax.
Yeah.
People are timid, they're scared, and they're scared about this brand new industry, and they're scared about what they have to do to actually get exposure to it. So our business model is, how do we actually allow people to buy a DeFi protocol or a crypto protocol on a listed traditional exchange? And today, what you saw, and people need to be very, very careful about this, a Bitcoin ETF on the Bitcoin future is not a Bitcoin ETF. You're actually buying the future. And people need to understand that futures have a very particular concept to them in that you have to roll your future to maintain your exposure to the underlying.
Right.
And largely that industry was created for products such as gold or oil, where it's actually very, very costly to take delivery. Doing that for a product such as Bitcoin, which arguably has zero carry cost, is in my opinion more due to the fact that the SEC and the CFTC want to have control of this underlying product. So it's a very different concept. People need to understand that the costs associated with actually participating in a Bitcoin ETF on the futures, it's going to be more costly. It could be as much as 10 to 12% more costly,
Right.
because every time you roll that contract, you're paying what's called contango. For us, our Bitcoin ETN, so it's an exchange traded note that's very much particular to what goes on in Europe. It actually tracks the Bitcoin price perfectly. It's
Right.
perfectly hedged. So for every dollar that goes in, you own that $1 of Bitcoin. And I do think that as people start to understand what's going on in the market and they start seeing that there are products where you actually pay zero management fee. We charge zero management fee.
Hmm.
You don't lose anything on contango. You don't. You actually get perfect exposure to the underlying. I think you're going to see products such as ours generate a lot of traction. But the reality is that the ETF market is kind of where the entire world has gone over the last, I don't know, call it a decade, just because you can create all these structures where you get exposure to a larger basket of things. So, you have gold ETFs, silver ETFs, copper ETFs. For us, we've chosen a belief, and going back to your original question, literally only 1% of the world is really being able to get exposure to this industry. I think by actually taking these products and listing them on traditional exchanges, companies such as ourselves are going to give the rest of the world a chance to participate in this upside. And if you're a fund manager or even a 65-year-old who just wants to get a little bit of exposure, this is the way to do it. It's simpler.
Right.
You don't have to open up a Frax or a Kraken or a Coinbase account, and you can participate in the theoretical upside. So it's intriguing times. I think this industry is here to stay. I think it's going to revolutionize the world. A lot of people don't understand that this is growing 2 times faster than the internet did.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
if you're actually not on the ball and participating, you do stand a chance at missing out on arguably one of the best investments and trades that may ever confront you in your entire lifetime.
Yeah, the cycle is parabolic, I think, it's
Yeah.
at the very minimum right now with what we've seen, just where Bitcoin is today. But you dead on, and I'm glad you brought that up around futures, because that is something that I think a lot. We've done a couple episodes on that here on the show to talk about this evolution of where we think ETFs are going to go, with futures being the first
Yep.
real kind of milestone. Next, of course, will be a fully traded asset to where it is directly related to the underlying asset, much like what you guys have done. Obviously, you being in
Yep.
Canada, you guys have been able to work around that with regulatory issues,
Yep.
not faced with the SEC scenario. With that being the case, obviously placed there in Canada, you're working
Yeah.
toward a European opportunity here. Obviously, you have U.S. customers, I'm assuming, that
Yep.
are taking participation in this. What is the process for a U.S. investor to say, hey, I want to get into DeFi technologies? What's the process? How do I do it for our audience?
Yeah, so we are a very new company. Like, the fact we've gone from 0 to 250 million in AUM just on the Nordic growth market is pretty spectacular. We have a listed equity here in Canada. The symbol is DeFi, DEFI.NEO, NEO. The NEO
Hmm.
exchange is a credible Canadian exchange. We're also on the OTC pink sheets right now, which is actually making things a little bit difficult for US
Yeah.
investors. And that's DEFTF. But we do trade quite a bit of volume because people recognize, or at least are starting to recognize, that it's very difficult to get broad-based exposure to DeFi any other way than literally
Hmm.
our listed equity. But we are in the process of working towards getting listed on the NASDAQ. And I think, look, you always got to be careful if you put deadlines on things, but I do think that within the next month, we'll probably be listed on the NASDAQ, which obviously would be a game changer for us and obviously US investors. And you nailed it when you said it. You can go out and buy the underlying ETNs in Europe, and you're going to see many, many more very, very creative products from us. Or you can just buy the listed equity DeFi, which really truly is just a diversified way of trying to play the entire ecosystem, the entire DeFi ecosystem.
DeFi has been obviously this year, I would call it the year of DeFi 2021. One is
Yep.
its coming out
Yep.
party. We've seen the integration of NFT gaming, et cetera, really
Yep.
kind of
Yep.
ramp up. And also all of the number of chains that really have started to develop, whether you look at the Solana ecosystem or what's happening in
Yep.
Avalanche and the team over with John Woo and all those guys. Aside from what the big guy, being Ethereum, has been able to do in terms
Yep.
of market leader and first mover, where do you see DeFi moving as it pertains to the traditional financial system? Because that's really, when you look at DeFi, whether you go on the Curve or you're in Aave or any
Yeah.
one of the protocols, a lot of people are playing this right now for yield farming, for ways
Yep.
to truly lend their crypto, which almost is circumventing the entire banking system. And it's still very,
Yeah.
very young, and it's only being
Yeah.
used by us, us ultra crypto geeks. So I'm
Yep.
just wondering what happens when we see a 5 to 10% market share acceptance or adoption.
Look, and fantastic question, by the way. And honestly, this is the question that I think everybody's asking themselves: Where's DeFi
Right.
going? What's it going to be? Look, it's such a new industry or entity or ecosystem that some of the winners or supposed winners right now may not even be winners in the end. Like, a lot of people look at Solana and view it as a challenge, quite frankly, to Ethereum. Um, all I know, and I actually am, I could probably consider myself a bit of an expert on this. I spent 15 years on Bay Street and Wall Street. I have a master's degree in economics. I started a PhD in economics. I was an institutional salesperson, trader, corporate finance. And the anecdote that I would give you is I watched DMA, which is direct market access, and there's a great book
Mm-hmm.
by Michael Lewis called Flash Boys, basically revolutionized the way that institutions access the equity markets. In a way, that's almost a DeFi-like protocol, if you can think of it that way. Again, very,
Right.
very different, but it transformed the way that literally trading was done, and it minimized the impact of salespeople and trading people within the banking network.
Right.
I see a world where definitely TradFi, traditional finance, will exist. I just don't think that's ever going to be completely destabilized. But I do see DeFi forcing TradFi, traditional finance, to become far more innovative, far more respectful of individuals, and quite frankly, their rights. I mean, you can look at a platform like Aave where you can lend whatnot. I can see a world where real estate, is going to be a metaverse. You're going to be
Mm-hmm.
using Aave to borrow money. You're going to be buying a tokenized house. And these are all the impacts of what DeFi is going to bring to the world. So all I see it as is a way to make things more efficient and the world, quite frankly, to get a little bit better. People need to take a step back and realize that. And I remember these times, 1994, 95, like, email didn't even exist. Now you can't even imagine a world where you don't have email. I think that's I think that's what you're going to see with DeFi. It's just a matter of embracing it. It is
Yeah.
change, and people tend to be a little bit scared of change. And quite frankly, even I was one of those people. I'm a traditional finance banking guy who couldn't really get my head around Bitcoin. I saw a different future for Ethereum, and yet here I am running a DeFi company that wants to change the way that people can get access to DeFi protocols. And it's exciting. It should be embraced. I really do think it's here to stay forever.
Yeah.
I think you probably end up with a world where the leading protocols are probably bought by traditional finance. That could be an outcome that occurs. I know that's going to send shivers down, like the hardcore
The retail
maxis, but
investor. Yeah.
but it It's honestly, since the internet, it's internet 3.0. This is the most exciting time that people should consider. Again, it's the chance to buy Amazon in the year 2000.
Yep.
I
Yep.
really think this is a spectacular opportunity for people, and change, like I said, can be scary, but let's make it fun.
Yeah. Russell, when you look at you've been around the financial markets for some time. I've grew up in the tech industry, working with Microsoft and many other tech
Yep.
companies, and understanding this adoption scenario. It's the cycle of the consumer psychology, really, when it comes to it. Whether it's a use case with
Yep.
tech or in a scenario like this, it's finance. But when you look at DeFi, do you feel like we are too early? Because I always look at, if you look at Bitcoin for the most part, when I was talking to my friends in 2017, Bitcoin was still, in 2017, was pretty much unheard of. 2013, they
Yeah.
thought you were
Yeah.
literally, doing drugs out the
Yep.
back of your car. Now it's a commonplace,
Yep.
discussion at a dinner table
Yep.
with almost anybody. Do you feel like we're too early on DeFi, where I feel like Bitcoin and traditional cryptocurrencies, blue chip anyway, are somewhat, I tried to explain DeFi to some friends of mine in the real estate business this past weekend. They got
Yep.
lost in about the first 5 minutes of the conversation. Do you feel like we're too
Yep.
early?
Look, that's like asking whether or not investing in Amazon or Microsoft at $50 was too early.
Yeah,
Um, it probably was, because you could have bought it on the next dip, which took it down to $5. But now you're looking at it, split many times over at many
sure.
thousands of dollars. So,
Yeah,
you could argue that you're too soon, or we're too soon. But the reality is that if you're taking even a 1 or 2 year view, just looking at, I mentioned TVL, total value locked, last year in the single digit billions, this year in the 100 billions. I think in the coming years, that's going to be in the 500 to trillions.
hmm,
Yes, it's going to be a bumpy ride. Bitcoin's been a bumpy ride. But what Bitcoin has taught us, and Ethereum as well, is that if you actually are an investor rather than a trader, you will win on this trade. You
yeah,
will do just fine. And when you listen to some of the podcasts that are out there, the Pomp podcast would be one of the top ones, CoinDesk. You get legendary macro investors who literally, like, people need to remember, the Fed has effectively eliminated fixed income as an investment opportunity, at least in my
sure.
opinion.
Yeah,
The only way that you can actually get the yields that you would have traditionally gotten from your fixed income securities is now through DeFi protocols and their yields, basically these
hmm,
staking yields. So I guess I'm taking a political stance on this answer and saying, yes, you're kind of right, but you're kind of wrong.
yeah,
If you're you just look at look at Hive. Those were stocks that went up to 10-15 bucks, at least Hut, then back down to sub $2-3, and now back up to $15. You have to you have to swallow a little bit as you watch this, because it is volatile and it's a little bit uncomfortable. But the reality is that this high tide ultimately is going to float at least the winners and most of the boats. And for a patient investor, I think it's going to bring tremendous rewards. So yeah, early, but man, I'd rather be early and just be sitting and watching than too late. So
yeah. And I think that's the thing. The good part of this, at least when it comes to technology, is we've seen this dance before.
yep,
So a lot of people can relate. It was different in the early 90s, 2000s, where they had not seen the dance before. The dance was just beginning,
yep,
where in
yep.
cryptocurrency and just blockchain, I think, yeah, we've seen the dance before. All right, so good on DeFi, and I feel like there is going to be a large amount of adoption. We talked a little bit about,
Mm-hmm.
the issue and the demand I think it's going to put on traditional finance and the banking system. Do you think we'll see a handful of banks break out, whether they're European banks, US banks, or abroad, that will break out with some competitive products that would actually compete with where DeFi's products are going today?
Look, I think that competition will always drive the banks into areas where money is being made.
Right.
Um, you know, what I would use to answer this at least is the paradigm that's being adopted in Germany. Germany is almost the exact opposite of what's going on in the U.S. You
Hmm.
hold a crypto product for a year, you pay no tax. They're allowing what are called special funds to invest up to 20% of their assets. That's a $415 billion injection into the
Wow.
crypto universe, without changing their OMs and whatnot. There's a going back to my economics background. There's a bunch of other dynamics that are impacting the way things are proceeding right now, and one of those is sort of a battle between the U.S. dollar and the rest of the globe in terms of, the dominant settlement currency, which was the U.S. dollar, and you're seeing China about to launch its own cryptocurrency, probably backed by gold, and some other commodities. I can't say that for certain. I'm just guessing. But yeah, ultimately the banks are going to have to get involved. It's just whether or not they do it by buying companies such as, DeFi. If we can
Right.
drive our AUM and get to, call it multi-billions or even a trillion, you're probably looking at some sort of a takeout opportunity. Um, how they go about doing it, I mean, I think you're witnessing part and parcel of it. You
Hmm.
saw sort of the Goldmans and the JP Morgans. I don't want to say putting down Bitcoin. That's probably too light. They almost were disregarding it, and now they're actually creating their own trading desk to actually take advantage of it. So it's look, this is an industry that's evolving faster. Like I said, two times faster than what was happening with the internet. And I'm sure there was a period of time, I haven't looked at it, where probably an analyst wrote a really, really negative report on Amazon or even Microsoft, maybe even Apple. And
Many
look where they
times.
are right now. Yeah. So it's, yeah, it's, I think as we see the capital inflows, which we're seeing now, and I do think that even though the Bitcoin futures ETF, I think that is truly a flawed structure, and really I do think that people need to be wary of the cost that they'll actually be incurring to be involved in it. But as you see more capital flow into even that product, you're effectively creating a justification for the entire industry as it grows, moving forward. And that will indeed, in my opinion, it's just a matter of time where you see maybe a European or a creative bank. I don't think it'll be a tier one to start. They tend to be the slowest. It's hard to turn a battleship on a dime, but you might see one of the tier two or tier three banks start to get involved in this space very, very aggressively, just to be innovative and stay cutting edge.
Yeah. I think with ETFs on the future side, if you look at some of the historical aspects of other categories within the investment instruments that have been used in the past, in some cases, not all, but in some cases, it does usually push a lot of the investors to start to move to the underlying asset. So obviously they've
Yep.
got an ETF there, but they do push into the underlying asset to help essentially support it. So I'm curious how this is going to affect. Obviously, we've got Valkyrie going live this week,
Yep.
and many others that are lined up. So I'm just curious on the numbers that will really start to push into that, whether or not people will really start to see that as an investment opportunity versus going, say, a route of what DeFi Tech is doing, where your analysts are going in, looking at the best protocols, putting in, these wrapped products, building
Yep.
what is a true one-to-one. And I think that's
Yep.
where a lot of people maybe are missing the connection on these one-to-ones, even in these wrapped protocols, of
Yep.
understanding what that can mean, for that. How are you guys going about educating the average investor that says, tell me about Curve and how does that work, kind of
Well,
thing.
we're on the Paul Barron network. That's one of the ways we're doing it.
There you go.
Look, it's going to take time, but even as early as today, GBTC, the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, I think traded at a 20% discount of Bitcoin, just this morning,
Okay.
on sort of this
Yep.
this this feeling of sell the news. Fundstrat, which is just a data collecting center, which measures inflows and what could happen, considering the amount of money that might be going into these futures products. just
Right.
came out with a $168,000 target on Bitcoin. Look, there's so many global forces at play here. Um, to me, look, the reality is there are certain things you just can't actually. Um, the facts tell the story. One of the facts is the U.S. dollar is printing. The Fed is printing so many U.S. dollars, you cannot maintain superiority when you have a product that is being printed in like mass quantities like never seen before. What are
Right.
your alternatives? Well, many of the other fiat currencies are doing the same thing. What are
Hmm.
your alternatives? Well, then you get quickly into gold, silver, crypto products, DeFi protocols. Like where are these fund flows going to go? And then you also have this other dynamic of um, returns, fund returns, bank returns, performance, and you're going to start seeing, in my opinion, a divergence in the performance of traditional funds that actually are terrified of actually getting into this sector versus funds that are actually adopting a more liberal perspective on, yeah, why don't we buy DeFi and put it in our portfolio? That's a
Hmm.
broad-based way of actually getting exposure to
Right.
this DeFi space. And as you see outperformance, and you will, the alpha is going to be staggering. It's already been staggering, right? The single best performing asset in the world over the last basically decade has been Bitcoin, and probably number two is Ethereum. You're just, it's almost like the perfect storm is occurring. You have governments destroying their currencies like you've never ever seen before. You have people who have been listening to the Fed talk about transitory inflation, and yet here we are paying more and more and more for everything. And the only way that you can actually keep up with it is to be long either cryptocurrencies, DeFi protocols, or the laggards thus far have been gold and silver. But I even see a world where hard assets are going to be, you know, ripping, like just running so quickly. And just look at oil and what oil's done. So, I mean,
Hmm.
this is a, yes, a play, a technological play, but it's also a play to bring power back to the masses. It's a play to bring the banks back in line with the people, quite frankly.
Right.
And it's also a play on basically the destruction of fiat currency in a global systemic fashion. So um, it's going to be a really, really interesting next 1 year. It's going to be a fascinating next decade.
Yeah.
And my view is, like I said, the growth is happening so quickly that you know you go from 2000 to 2020 and you look at what the internet has done to our life. Just wait and see what's going to happen with DeFi and crypto moving
Right.
twice as fast.
You've hit on a lot a lot of topics we talk about here on the network quite a bit with many
Yep.
experts. We just had the team of Cody on yesterday talking about this very issue of this transition of the fiat system and the monetary system in general and what that might look like, especially with central banks adopting
Yep.
digital currencies. And Europe is, of course, I would say one of the early leaders. Obviously, we know what's happening in China with, the digital yuan and kind of
Yep.
where that market is going. The U.S. still very slow in adoption of digital currency. I have a feeling we're going to see some movement here, maybe even
Yep.
within the Biden's administration before our next election, where we could see some adoption there. The true shift between digital currency and the traditional fiat system or the Fed here in the U.S., that could be a massive, I mean, that's going to be a world stage event, obviously, when that
Yep.
occurs. Do you think that's
Yep.
something that's going to occur in the next 5 years?
Oof, I don't know if it's going to be the next 5 years, but I mean, you're already seeing cracks in this so-called invincible foundation called the U.S.
Right.
dollar, right?
Yep.
It's crazy. If you Google the petro yuan in the U.S., you barely
Hmm.
get anything that comes up on Google, right? Like these platforms actually monitor and create how you actually see information, right? It's the social media phenomenon.
Hmm.
But the reality is, you can now, for the first time ever, settle oil in gold or in Chinese yuan or renminbi. That's a major, major, major change that no one's paid attention to, and it really becomes even more obvious when you look at the fact that basically Russia and China have been buying up all of the world's gold, right? Like there are just
Right.
these major data points that people aren't paying attention to. And if you look at a way to protect yourself from the systematic, honestly, destruction of the U.S. dollar's value, and it's happening. Like, you may not like to hear it as a U.S. citizen. Quite frankly, as a Canadian citizen, we're doing the same thing to our currency. But if you want to actually protect yourself from that, there are very few ways to do it. But one of them is to be long
Yeah.
cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, Ethereum, DeFi protocols, gold, silver, hard assets, and inflation is here. I don't care what the Fed says; they can jawbone it all they want.
Hmm.
Everything's gotten more expensive. Just go to the price of oil. Like, some people are calling for
Right.
$120 oil here, and
Insane.
it was what was it? It was negative dollars a year ago, right? You remember when it dropped
Right.
below zero for the first time ever?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm throwing a lot of different perspectives out there, but that's just because of my academic and my career background. But the reality is, this again, you just have to go back to sort of macro trends. And the macro trend, I don't think you've ever seen one bigger or more substantial than this trend towards eliminating a government's ability to just print the crap, hopefully I'm allowed to say crap, out of fiat currency, and destroy and debase it, which is your and my livelihood, right? Like, you have to
Yeah.
remember, this is something that hits us daily.
Yep.
And the white papers that actually sit behind these protocols and these currencies, these cryptocurrencies, I mean, there's a reason why they were created. People do not want to see this continue. And how do you maintain and protect your wealth in these scenarios? It's very, very
Yeah.
hard. But luckily, we've been given this crazy thing called Bitcoin that has
Yeah.
taken taken on a life of its own.
Yeah. Last question to you, Russell. When you look at DeFi, obviously with the team that you have in place
Yeah.
there at DeFi Technology, is there any protocol that you really are excited about, that you're really pumped about, whether it's ETH 2.0 or any other
Yeah.
underlying protocols that you're really leaning into, especially around the investment class for your own customers and investors that are moving into DeFi tech?
Yeah, so we've taken the perspective that, and I think everyone needs to take this perspective. You really don't know who the winner is going to be. Like,
Right.
Ethereum to a lot of people is the one that's going to win and be the basis for everything, just because it's seemingly what DeFi is being built off of. But
Hmm.
then, we co-invested in Sovereign, which is a DeFi protocol on the Bitcoin blockchain,
Yep.
with Anthony Pompliano, and there, I do think that that's a trend that you're going to see more and more and more of. But I can tell you that there are a few that I think have an incredible future. Solana is one that is just picking up momentum. A lot of people need to start paying a little bit more attention to the sort of the metaverse, and in particular the gaming metaverse. So the
Right.
axes, the engines, the polygons, they're incredibly creative and could change the world in and of themselves, just from a metaverse perspective. And then, of course, Cardano is widely viewed as the most ESG compliant.
Right.
The way that we view it, though, that was more just my own personal perspective. We'll be creative and try to offer the biggest, and the most traded and the most liquid, just because, just using sort of logic, that would mean typically that they're getting the most traction. People are paying more attention to them as their asset base grows and their TVL grows. But this is a world where you could actually see the world's leading protocol be non-existent in a decade, because something else replaces it with a code or an
Right.
open source protocol that's just better or superior to the other one.
Yeah.
So volatility is something people need to be very comfortable with. But that's why, from my perspective, and I put my money where my mouth is. I've bought a lot of DeFi, as an equity, just because it's my belief that it's the future of the financial
Right.
system, or at least will coexist with TradFi, but in a major way. Um, you've got to play it in a diversified way. You don't want to get caught long only one. And so what's the best way to do that? You buy a diversified way to play it. And what's a great diversified way to play DeFi? Well, DeFi the equity, which is what we're trying to build and bring to the masses. So
Yeah.
that was my own way of sort of super pumping our equity.
Uh, there you go. It was a nice pump. Good
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
We
Thanks.
appreciate that. We appreciate that. I think you're right. The key there is diversification in DeFi, and
Yeah.
and also just your point that I think is a good one is this whole aspect of, in a decade, the face of crypto and blockchain is going to be completely different. We're going to see new
Yeah.
players, new development architecture, maybe even some new code sets, and that could be developing on blockchain 3.0 and beyond. What
Yeah.
we're going to see. I
Yeah.
mean, you already kind of see that a little bit of that struggle right now between Haskell and what's happening with just traditional blockchain development. And I think
Yeah.
as we see both the code development teams as well as the leaders that kind of jump into those spaces start to shift their mindset, because you're right, there's going to be so many different application uses for DeFi that's just going to be mind-boggling, because the world hasn't even had a chance to accept it yet. So
Yeah.
all business case and use case scenarios are just now getting started, and whether you're developing on Cardano or over on Solana or Ethereum, really could be
Yeah.
insignificant in a few years. It's really more about
Yeah.
kind of where the market's going to lead. But anyway, Russell Starr, great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for stopping in. We appreciate it from DeFi Technologies. Good luck to you guys.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having us on, and hopefully we can chat again.
Absolutely. All right, you guys are tuned in over on the podcast right now. Make sure and give us some kudos over there. We love that, especially on Spotify. Man, Spotify has been really doing great for the show. But the number one way you're going to catch all of the great content here on the show is you got to get over to YouTube and subscribe, because we do technical analysis. We drop in our new proprietary sentiment and amplification data over our charts on an ongoing basis. And best of all, you can also jump into a thing called the Diamond Circle. The Diamond Circle is very simple. You can join for free. Hit the link below. It gets you into some supreme education. We drop a lot of analytic insider data from our own research, and as well, we also drop a ton of digital asset rewards back to our community. So that's the best way. It's free to you guys to get in, but just go to paulwarennetwork.com/diamond-circle, and you're going to hit it right there and be in it. So if you guys want to hit me up on Twitter, do so at Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.